And welcome back. Now, in this second segment, we're going to be taking a closer look at Lord Shiva and learn some basic facts about this god, about his powers, about how he's worshipped, and a bit about his wife also, the goddess called Shakti. So let's get started. The name Shiva means auspicious. His names used to be Rudra, or the Howler, in the Vedas, but at the beginning of the Common Era, he starts getting called a bunch of other names that are still popular today. Maheshwara, or Mahadeva, which means the great god, Pashupati, the lord over creatures, or Shankara, the agent of peace. His consort, or his wife, is called Shakti, a word that itself means power, actually, Shakti, and she serves as the kind of female embodiment of this Shiva's sacred power. Shiva's powerless without her, basically. In her domesticated form, she's called Uma, or Parvati. The Shiva Uma relationship actually kind of captures a distinct duality or paradox that's at the heart of Shiva as a deity. And it's been there ever since Vedic times, actually. Shiva is both creative and destructive. He's sexually promiscuous and Shiva is celibate. He's super angry and he's compassionate. Right? Now, how on earth could he be all of these things? Well, one way to think about it is that Shiva has two different kind of dimensions to him. When he's by himself, he's like the great yogi. He's celibate, he's a renouncer, he's deep in meditation. He's also really quick to anger if you should happen to disturb him. He's filled with a kind of violent and uncontrollable destructive power that's going to make him closely associated with death and destruction. But when he's with his wife, Shiva settles down. He becomes the great agent of procreation. He's the lord over all creatures. He's sexual, he's virile, he's a kind of macho man of sorts, giving life and energy to all of us. And he's filled with compassion to his devotees who come seeking his help. So this is his kind of two-sided nature. In some of the depictions of Shiva, actually, these get fused into one, where he's depicted as being both man and woman, both Shiva and Shakti at the same time. Here's an example you can see of a sandstone sculpture of this. Shiva has a number of other forms as well. In the form of Shiva Bhairava, he's closely associated with the secret ascetic practices that were probably taking place at the cremation grounds late at night. There he is, looking all kind of frightening and intense. Shiva was also associated with dance and music. He's in this form. He's called Nataraja, who dances the great Tandava dance to usher in the final destruction and kind of collapse of the cosmos. Here's Nataraja with a multitude of arms depicting that vigorous and majestic dance that would tear apart the entire universe. Shiva is also closely connected to the wild and natural world of the jungle, filled with its animals and birds and plants and trees. In that form, he's called Pashupati. He's the lord over all of these beasts. And he's usually depicted as having dreadlocks and in kind of yogic posture, while wild animals surround him in devotion. Eventually, there's also a form called Harihara, where he's half Shiva and half Vishnu, actually, in an effort maybe to kind of appeal to both the Shaivas and Vaishnavas at the same time. Anyway, given that Shiva has all these forms, how are you supposed to then worship him? How do you gain his grace, his prasada? How do you share in Shiva's power? You can do it in two ways, either by worshipping his iconic form or his aniconic form. Iconic means a form that has physical attributes, like a face and arms and legs and all of that. Aniconic means that it doesn't have distinct physical attributes. In other words, an aniconic image is a symbolic image. Shiva's aniconic form is known as the linga, which literally means sign or marker. In Sanskrit, the word linga also means phallus, penis, right? And the linga kind of looks like a phallus, so naturally we might wonder about what exactly is going on here with Shiva's linga. Well, let's turn to this kind of important issue. The linga itself is a symbol of Shiva's transcendent masculine power. It's pure energy, pure physical force that's again both creative and destructive. The linga symbolizes this power. It never just sits by itself in a temple, actually, but a linga has to be installed into a base, which is called a yoni, a receptacle, which likewise represents the female procreative power of the goddess, this pure Shakti. Now, as you can see, the installation is a rather complicated process. The linga has to extend 1/3 down into the ground below the yoni as well. You worship the linga by cooling it down to help calm and contain the kind of fiery energy that it represents. It's done by pouring milk and other cooling liquids onto the linga. And as these dribble down, they're caught in the trough of the yoni, then drain out as the tirtha, the holy water that's regarded as being infused with Shiva's grace. It's his prasada, and sips of this holy water are offered to devotees who are visiting the temple. So, is this linga a phallus? Is this phallic worship? It's a reasonable question, actually, so let's try to make a mature and reasonable approach to figure this out. Now, first, the earliest examples of lingas do kind of seem like that they're shaped like a phallus. They look like penises, right? Here, for example, is the famous linga of Gurimallam in Andhra Pradesh with a giant phallus behind a kind of iconic image of Shiva who's standing on top of a demon. This piece is dated to actually around the 2nd century BCE, and it makes it the oldest known linga that there is. It's quite distinctly shaped like a penis, there can be no doubt. The early myths of Shiva also are quite explicit about Shiva's penis, especially the myth of the sages of the pine forest. We'll be looking at this in the next segment. And there's another thing. One of Shiva's important incarnations is an ascetic named Lakulisha, and he's regularly described as being perpetually ichthyphallic. Now, as the years progress, the lingas do start getting more and more abstract in their design. Around the 1st and 2nd centuries, lingas start actually to have heads. They have either one head or 4 heads. So maybe it starts looking less and less like a physical penis if it was supposed to actually originally look like one at all. Now, part of this issue here, I think, and what the image itself plays on is there's a double meaning at play in the image. The linga image works kind of like a pun might work, where one word means one thing, but you make a joke of it by making it mean something else. For example, it can be kind of painful to use Microsoft Windows if you're used to using a Mac. Get it? It's painful. It's a pun. It's probably a painful pun. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, I think the linga image is actually doing the same thing visually here. The typical aniconic form of a linga has ridges and lines that could imply that it's a penis if you have penises on your mind. Right? But true devotees who don't have penises on their mind, they see the linga not as a penis, but as being a symbol of Shiva's power. What they would say is that it's only those with deluded eyes who see it as a penis. Right? In a pun, it's your sense of humor, right, that makes you appreciate the wonderful juxtaposition of meanings. In religious life, it's your faith, it's your bhakti that allows you to obliterate that superficial interpretation of the linga as being a penis, right, and control your thoughts so that they remain focused on Shiva and his limitless sacred power. So again, what I'd like to emphasize that in no layer of theistic worship of Shiva, not in its earliest strands, certainly not now in mainstream Shaivism, was the linga puja ever just the worship of human penises for fertility or for sexual purposes, despite what you might see written on the internet. So when you see these charming southern ladies, for example, pouring oblations onto the linga, they are not worshiping a penis, and it should not be interpreted as penis worship, I beg you. Anyhow, whatever the linga may be, there are also iconic or anthropomorphic representations of Shiva that are used in worshiping him. These are forms which he takes, where he takes an embodied appearance, so he appears in a human-like form. It's most commonly found as images or posters or statues in homes or temples all over India. The key to understanding iconic forms like these is that all of the various features that are found on the image correspond to different myths about Shiva. And so, with the typical depiction of Shiva by himself, like the one you see, he's shown as an ascetic with dreadlocks, covered in ashes, with rosary beads in his hand, and on his arms also. Then these help him recite the meditative mantras, and he's wearing an antelope skin. As such, he represents the great yogi, Yogindra. You also notice that the Ganga River is pouring out of the top knot of his hair. This refers actually to a myth of how, when the Ganga River was first asked to come down to earth from her natural flow in the heavens, the Ganga would have been too destructive actually to come directly onto the earth. So Shiva agreed to let the Ganga first fall on his head to soften the blow, and then she could course through his dreadlocks and go gently down to earth. This makes him called Gangadhara, the bearer of the Ganga. It also makes his wife Uma really jealous. It's kind of funny, actually. You'll then notice that he has a crescent moon lodged in his hair. It's also a reference to another myth about Shiva that associates him with the moon, which makes him known as Chandrasekhara, the fellow with the moon on his head. Also depicted here is Shiva's third eye, which is opening slightly in his forehead. When it's fully open, this eye will unleash a kind of blazing beam of fire. In mythology, this beam of fire had destroyed Kamadeva, the god of love, just as he was shooting his flower arrow at Shiva to try to get him to fall in love with Parvati, with Uma, who he eventually did, and who became his wife. Then there's his throat, which is blue because he swallowed up the deadliest known poison in the world called the halahala that would have destroyed anyone and everything in the universe. This makes him known as Nilakantha, blue-throated one. The cobra named Vasuki, who's draped around his throat, is a reminder of the essential role that Shiva played during the mythic churning of the ocean, through which the gods received the nectar of immortality, Amrita. We'll be looking at that too. Finally, surrounding him are all the various ascetic elements that make him the lord of wild creatures, the Pashupati. He's in the wild forest, he's seated on the tiger skin, he's carrying his trident and his drum and his water pot. Now that's the single form of Shiva, Shiva by himself, but he also has a family version, a domesticated Shiva with wife and kids. Here he is in a kind of complete family portrait. To his left is his wife, Parvati or Uma, who's the daughter of the Himalaya mountains. On each side of the couple are their two sons, Skanda and Ganesha. Skanda is also known as Murugan in South India and Kartikeya in the north. Ganesha is the elephant-headed god, the remover of obstacles, who everyone prays to at the start of any new undertaking, so that everything can go okay when you make your endeavor. Beneath them are various animal vehicles that they have. These are the loyal servants who kind of who are emblems or typify the kind of persona that we devotees are supposed to assume when we're doing bhakti, when we're worshipping them. Nandi the bull is Shiva's vehicle. The peacock is the vehicle of Skanda. In front of Ganesha, you see his vehicle, which is a tiny little mouse. Now, not pictured here are hosts of other kind of shady, often sort of macabre, gross-looking figures who are called Shiva's Ganas, his kind of minions or gangsters, who carry out his bidding whenever violent tasks are to be done, enforcement of things. Ganesha is the leader of these Ganas, and actually we're going to find out how he came to be so in the next clip. In fact, much of this iconic imagery is established through Shaiva Puranic mythology. Now, before we jump into this mythology, I did want to go over kind of quickly the significance of the goddess in Hinduism, our Uma, our dear Uma, since we actually won't be spending a lot of time looking at goddesses, unfortunately. Now, consorts came to be a kind of really important part of theistic or popular Hinduism because they were embodiments of the god's sacred power, or Shakti, so kind of a embodiment of the power that the god has. Shiva's wife is Uma, or Parvati. And the pair is often depicted together in sculpture in the kind of typical romantic Uma Maheshwara pose. The other two members of the Hindu trinity also have their consorts. Vishnu has his wife Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune. Brahma, the four-faced grandfather, has his consort Saraswati, the goddess of learning. Anyway, that's how the goddess works as a consort, as a kind of secondary representative of the god's Shakti, his power. In some cases, though, Shiva's consort Shakti appears on her own without him as a great goddess, with a capital G, as Mahadevi in Sanskrit, the mega goddess. Here she gets to have special powers and becomes the object of special kinds of tantric or yogic meditative practices, worship. An entire mythology develops around the great goddess, and she's often identified with very locally specific goddesses, like mountain spirits or forest spirits or river goddesses, village deities, all these kind of things. When Parvati is kind of sedate and demure, but these independent forms of the goddess are often fierce, terrifying, violent. They're singular expressions of the kind of massive power that can be unleashed out of women if they're harmed. Goddesses often require meat and alcohol to be appeased, and their rituals can be kind of intense and fierce. Two important manifestations of the great goddess are Durga, who's associated with violence, and Kali, who's associated with death and disease. If you're facing either of these things, violence or death or disease, you can pray to these goddesses and they'll intervene and they'll put a stop to it. Or if you anger them, violence, death, and disease will come upon you, so you have to appease them. Well, we've reached the end of our kind of little exploration of the temple of facts and ideas around Shiva and his consort. We're now going to turn to two specific myths from the Shiva Puranas, where we can flesh out Shiva's persona in more detail by a couple of stories, basically. So, till then, maybe let's go and meditate on the true meaning of the linga, be mindful of Kali's wrath, lest we anger her, and I'll see you in a minute.